The screen flickers to life. My dead father's face accuses me of murder. The boardroom doors lock behind me, my attorney's keycard the only way out. A security guard lunges, but I swing the glass award hard. His master keycard hits the floor. One chance. The server room holds the truth. If I don't get there first, the poison in my system becomes my conviction. The toxin burns through me. My brother's panicked breaths fill the silence. Henderson's voice cuts like a blade. They'll find it in your blood. The clock's ticking. I have a keycard, a dying body, and 30 seconds before the police arrive. The mahogany table stretched like a funeral pyre under the boardroom's sterile LED glow. Sarah Johnson gripped the velvet upholstery of her chair, the fabric biting into her palms. On the wall-sized monitor, Arthur Johnson sat in his study, silver hair catching the artificial light. His eyes, clouded by the final stages of the toxin, pierced through the lens. "If you are watching this, Sarah, the arsenic has finished its work," Arthur said. His voice lacked its usual gravelly warmth, replaced by a rhythmic, wheezing whistle. He leaned toward the camera, a tremor shaking his thin frame. "I built this empire on trust. You dismantled it with a vial." The air conditioning hummed, a low drone that suddenly cut out. A heavy metallic thud echoed through the floorboards. Steel shutters slid over the floor-to-ceiling windows, swallowing the Manhattan skyline in a series of harsh, mechanical clacks. The scent of ozone drifted from the vents. Sarah reached for her phone, but the screen flashed a crimson warning. Access denied. Her thumb hovered over the glass. Across the screen, her father's recorded face twisted into a grimace of practiced disappointment. "The police received the evidence 5 minutes ago," Arthur continued. His image flickered, pixelating around the edges of his mouth. "The room stays sealed until they arrive to collect the remains of our legacy." Sarah's chest tightened. She pushed away from the table, the heavy chair legs screeching against the polished marble. The silence following the sound felt absolute, broken only by the frantic, uneven rhythm of her own pulse drumming in her ears. Arthur's frozen image loomed over her, a digital ghost demanding a confession from a locked tomb. "This is a performance," Sarah whispered, though her voice caught in her throat. She looked at the heavy oak doors at the end of the boardroom. "Michael, he's bluffing. He's always been dramatic." Michael Johnson didn't answer. He was already pacing the perimeter of the room, his boots thumping dully against the thick Persian rug. His fingers were shoved deep into his pockets, but Sarah could see the frantic movement of his hands. Snip, snap, snip, snap. The sound of the rusted guitar string coiling around his fingers was a rhythmic, metallic rasp that set Sarah's teeth on edge. "Stop that!" she snapped, her eyes darting to the digital clock on the wall. 10:04 a.m. The numbers were large, glowing a predatory red. "We need to audit the situation. Panic is a liability we cannot afford." "Audit?" Michael spun around, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "He just told the world you killed him, Sarah. The doors are locked. The windows are steel. This isn't a business meeting. It's a coffin." Robert Henderson, the family's longtime attorney, stepped toward the heavy doors. He didn't look at the siblings. Instead, his eyes moved upward, scanning the ceiling tiles. His lips moved in a silent, practiced rhythm. 22, 23, 24. He reached the end of his count and finally turned, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his tie knotted with military precision. "The locks are mechanical overrides," Robert said, his voice a calm, gray drone. "Arthur had them installed last month. I assumed it was for high-value negotiations." I didn't realize the value being negotiated was his own children's freedom. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a heavy brass key, sliding it into the manual deadbolt. The metal groaned, a deep, grinding sound of iron meeting iron. With a final, echoing thud, the bolt slid home. "I am locking this door from the inside for your protection," Robert continued, his eyes cold. "If the police are indeed on their way, we need a unified narrative." "Michael, sit down." "Sarah, stop looking at the clock. The time for the ledger has passed. We are now in the era of the statement." "Statement?" Michael's voice rose to a jagged, hysterical pitch. "He's dead. He's on that screen telling the cops Sarah poisoned him. What statement covers that?" "Oops." Sarah felt a bead of sweat slide down her spine, cold against her silk blouse. She opened her phone again, hoping for a flicker of signal, but the bars remained at 0. The room felt smaller, the air growing heavy with the smell of old paper and the faint, bitter scent of the almond-scented cleaning fluid the janitors used. "Michael, your heart rate is visible in your neck," Sarah said, forcing her voice into a flat, analytical scale. "It's 10:14 a.m., and you are already over-leveraged on your emotions. Sit down. We need to look at the liquidation schedule of these accusations. If he sent evidence, we need to know what it is." "Evidence?" Michael laughed, a dry hacking sound. "He's the evidence. He's the victim. He's Arthur Dam Johnson, and he just turned his own death into a PR nightmare for the only two people who share his blood." The tension in the room was a physical weight, a thick fog of distrust. Sarah watched Robert adjust his tie. 1, 2, 3. The gesture was so deliberate, it felt like a countdown. Suddenly, the heavy doors vibrated. A series of sharp, rhythmic bangs echoed through the wood, loud as gunshots. "Open up," a voice barked from the hallway. "Security. By order of the estate protocols, I am authorized to seize all communication devices." The door didn't budge, but the handle rattled violently. Robert stepped back, his eyes darting to the ceiling again, restarting his count. Michael retreated toward the windowless wall, his fingers working the guitar wires so hard, Sarah saw a drop of crimson hit the carpet. "That's Thomas," Michael hissed. "Dad's pet bulldog. He's not here to help. He's here to finish the job." The door groaned as a heavy weight slammed against it. Thomas Wilson, the head of security, wasn't a man who valued finesse. Sarah heard the clack, clack, clack of his heavy heels through the wood, followed by the inevitable rustle, rustle, rustle of him adjusting his own tie before the next strike. "Mr. Henderson, open the door," Thomas shouted. "I have a warrant signed by the deceased. I am to collect all phones and tablets immediately. Do not make me use the breaching tool." Sarah's mind raced. If Thomas took her phone, she lost her only link to her own encrypted files. The digital logs that proved she was in Chicago the night her father claimed he was first dosed. She looked at the heavy glass award sitting on the mahogany table, a jagged shard of crystal given to her for corporate excellence. It felt heavy, cold, and solid in her hand. "He's not taking anything," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. The door splintered. A heavy crowbar bit into the oak, twisting the frame until the wood shrieked. With a final, violent heave, the door flew open, slamming against the interior wall. Thomas Wilson stepped in, his neck thick, his face a mask of bureaucratic cruelty. He didn't look at the siblings. He looked at their pockets. "Phones on the table," Thomas ordered. "Now." He moved toward Michael first, his large hand reaching out like a claw. Michael froze, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I don't have it," Michael stammered. Don't lie to me, kid, Thomas growled, stepping into Michael's personal space. He grabbed Michael's shoulder, spinning him around. Sarah didn't hesitate. She moved with the calculated efficiency of a closing argument. She lunged forward, the glass award raised high. The crystal caught the LED light, flashing like a diamond before it connected with the back of Thomas's head. The sound was a sickening, wet thud. Thomas buckled, his knees hitting the marble floor with a bone-jarring crack. He slumped forward, his heavy breathing turning into a low, rhythmic moan. Sarah didn't wait for him to recover. She dropped to her knees, her fingers diving into the pocket of his tactical vest. Her hand closed around a cold, plastic rectangle, the master keycard. It was embossed with the Johnson crest, a golden lion that felt like a brand against her skin. "Sarah," Michael gasped, staring at the fallen guard. You hit him." "The net gain of his presence was 0, Michael," Sarah said, standing up and smoothing her suit jacket. She looked at the keycard. "This is the only way out, and more importantly, it's the only way into the server room." She turned to Robert, who was staring at the ceiling tiles, his lips moving frantically. 38, 39, 40. "Robert," Sarah said, her voice cutting through his trance. "The guard is down. The door is open. But my father's video is still playing. We need to move." Robert finally looked at her, but there was no relief in his gray eyes. He reached up, straightening his tie 3 times, a slow, deliberate motion that made Sarah's pulse spike. "Sarah," Robert said softly, his voice echoing in the now quiet room. "You shouldn't have done that. Not because of the guard, but because you've just proven your father's point. You are a woman of action when cornered." He stepped over Thomas's prone body and walked toward the monitor. He tapped a sequence into the side of the screen, and the video of Arthur paused. The old man's face was frozen in a sneer of triumph. "Arthur didn't just leave a video," Robert continued. "He left a toxicology report. He knew you'd find a way to escape this room. He knew you'd fight. That's why he chose the toxin he did." Sarah felt a cold prickle of unease. "What are you talking about? Arsenic?" He said arsenic. "He lied," Robert said. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "The lab results came back an hour before he died. It wasn't arsenic. It was a synthetic compound called VX7. It's a specialized catalyst used in high-end plastics manufacturing." Sarah felt the world tilt. Her lungs felt suddenly tight, the air in the room tasting like scorched dust. "VX7, Sarah whispered. That's a proprietary compound." "Yes," Robert said, his voice as sharp as a razor. "It's produced exclusively by Apex Industrials, your primary client for the last 6 years. The client you personally audited and cleared for a secure supply chain last month." Subverted beat 1.4. Sarah felt a surge of professional confidence. This was her territory. She knew the Apex files better than anyone. She knew the security protocols, the shipping manifests, and the chemical signatures. This was the smoking gun that would actually save her. "Robert, that's perfect," Sarah said, her voice regaining its authoritative clip. "Don't you see? If it's VX7, I can prove the leak. Apex has the most sophisticated tracking system in the world. Every milligram is logged. I can use the master keycard to get into the server room, pull the Apex shipment logs, and show exactly who checked out that compound. It won't be me. I don't have floor access. This is the evidence that clears me." She felt a wave of relief wash over her. The logic was sound. The data would be objective. In a world of her father's lies, The chemical ledger would be the one truth that couldn't be manipulated. She looked at Michael, who had stopped coiling his wire. "Michael, we're okay," she said, her shoulders dropping for the first time in an hour. "The paper trail will lead away from us. We just need to get to the servers." Robert nodded slowly, a small, paternal smile playing on his lips. "You're right, Sarah. Your attention to detail has always been your greatest strength. Go. The server room is on the 4th floor. I'll stay here and manage Thomas." Sarah turned toward the door, her mind already calculating the steps to the elevator. 1, 2, 3. She could almost taste the victory. The crisis was being managed. The variables were aligning. She stopped at the threshold. Something was wrong. She turned back. Robert wasn't looking at Thomas. He was looking at the monitor, his fingers moving across the screen in a sequence Sarah didn't recognize. "Robert?" she asked. The lawyer didn't look up. "The Apex logs are already in the system, Sarah. Arthur uploaded them himself." He hit a final key, and the monitor flashed red. "Access denied. Credentials revoked. Primary suspect identified." A document scrolled into view. It was a digital authorization form from Apex Industrials. It was dated 3 weeks ago. It authorized the release of 5 grams of VX7 for internal testing. At the bottom of the form, in the signature box, was Sarah's digital thumbprint and her private encryption key. "No," Sarah breathed, her knees going weak. "I never signed that. That's my private key. No one has that but me." "Arthur had it, Sarah," Robert said, finally looking at her. The warmth was gone from his eyes, replaced by a cold, clinical detachment. "He's been harvesting your codes for years. Every apology you logged into that phone of yours, every time you opened your spreadsheet, you were using a system he built. He didn't just poison himself. He used your own professional cleanliness to build the cage." The realization hit Sarah like a physical blow to the stomach. Her meticulousness, her reliance on digital ledgers, her pride in being the accountant of regret. It had all been a trap. By keeping a record of everyone else's failures, she had handed her father the perfect blueprint to frame her for her own. "The police aren't just coming for a statement," Robert whispered. "They're coming for the person whose signature is on the murder weapon. And according to the global ledger you helped build, that person is you." Sarah looked down at the master keycard in her hand. It felt heavy now, not like a tool of escape, but like a piece of evidence. She had just assaulted a guard to steal a key to a room that would only prove her guilt. She was in a worse position than when she started, and the red glow of the clock seemed to bleed into the very air she breathed. "We have to go," Michael said, his voice trembling as he grabbed her arm. "The estate, the Connecticut house. Dad said the final audit happens there. If the evidence is being fed from there, we have to stop it at the source." Sarah didn't argue. She couldn't. Her logic had failed her. She let Michael pull her toward the private elevator, the clack, clack, clack of their footsteps echoing through the hollowed-out empire of their father's ghost. The drive to the Connecticut estate was a blur of gray asphalt and skeletal trees. The state of Connecticut always felt like a curated museum of old money. And the Johnson estate was its centerpiece. As the black SUV pulled through the gates, Sarah saw the white paint of the fences gleaming with a blinding, predatory intensity. They were met at the door by Martha Miller, the hospice nurse. She was a small woman who smelled of lavender and antiseptic, her eyes perpetually downcast. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Martha whispered as they stepped into the foyer. She bumped into a heavy mahogany coat rack and immediately turned to it. "Excuse me, I didn't mean to. I'm so sorry." "Where's the clock, Martha?" Sarah demanded, her voice tight. Martha pointed a trembling finger toward the grand staircase. Every television in the house, from the small screen in the kitchen to the massive theater system in the den, was flickering to life. A giant digital clock appeared, the numbers 48:00:00 pulsing in a rhythmic, sickly green. "He said the audit ends when the clock stops," Martha whispered, her hands fluttering like trapped birds. "I'm so sorry. I tried to turn them off, but the buttons don't work." Sarah ignored her and marched toward the library, her heels clicking against the hardwood. She pulled her laptop from her bag and slammed it onto the desk. "I'm going to kill the feed," Sarah muttered. "I don't care about the Apex logs anymore. I'm wiping the whole network." She began to type, her fingers flying across the keys. She bypassed the first layer of security, a simple password prompt, with a sneer. But as she reached the core of the estate's network, the screen turned a stark, blinding white. A line of text appeared. "Attempted breach detected. Initiating data purge." "No!" Sarah shrieked. She watched in horror as her folders began to vanish. 5 years of client audits. Her apology log. Her private banking records. Everything was being eaten by a digital acid. She tried to pull the plug, but the laptop was locked, the internal battery humming with a high-pitched, agonizing whine. "It's gone," she whispered, staring at the empty screen. "He's deleting my life." "Sarah!" Michael's voice screamed from the hallway. She ran toward the sound, her heart hammering against her ribs. She found Michael standing by the back door, staring out into the manicured gardens. "The dogs," Michael said, his voice a flat, dead thing. Arthur's prize hunting hounds, 3 massive Rhodesian Ridgebacks, were sprawled near the perimeter fence. They weren't moving. Their chests rose and fell in a slow, drugged rhythm. "He didn't want them getting hurt when the fence turned on," Michael said. He pointed to the iron gates. A faint blue hum vibrated in the air, and the scent of ozone was thick. "They're electrified. We're in a cage, Sarah. A high-voltage 48-hour cage." Michael's face was pale, his skin slick with sweat. He began to shake, his fingers digging into his pockets, but he had lost his guitar wire in the scramble in Manhattan. He began to claw at his own cuticles until they bled. I need to sit down," Michael gasped, stumbling toward the kitchen. Sarah followed him, her mind spinning. She needed a plan. She needed a variable she could control. But as she entered the kitchen, she saw Michael standing by the butcher block, his hand closed around the handle of a heavy carving knife. "You did it, didn't you?" Michael whispered, his eyes unfocused. "The Apex logs, the signature. You framed me, and then you framed yourself to look innocent. You're the accountant. You always have a backup plan." "Michael, put the knife down," Sarah said, stepping back. "Your withdrawal is clouding your judgment. It's 2:14 p.m. You haven't had a fix in 12 hours. You're hallucinating." "I see perfectly," Michael screamed, lunging forward. The knife whistled through the air, catching the sleeve of Sarah's jacket. She scrambled backward into the pantry, the smell of aged balsamic and dried herbs filling her nose. Michael followed, his movements jagged and unpredictable. "You want the inheritance," he roared, swinging the knife again. He hit a shelf of vintage wine. A bottle of 1945 Bordeaux shattered, the dark red liquid spraying across Sarah's white blouse like a gunshot wound. The air filled with the heavy, fermented scent of grapes and broken glass. Sarah ducked behind a heavy wooden crate. As Michael lunged again, his foot slipped on the spilled wine. Sarah seized the moment. She grabbed a heavy gallon of olive oil and swung it with both hands, catching Michael in the chest. He went down hard, the knife skittering across the floor. Sarah threw herself on top of him, pinning his wrists to the ground. They struggled in the dark, the floor slick with oil and wine, their breathing the only sound in the cramped space. "Stop it," Sarah hissed into his ear. "I didn't do it. He's playing us both. Look at me, Michael. Look at the ledger." Michael's body went limp, the fight draining out of him as a sob broke from his throat. Sarah stayed on top of him for a long minute, her own heart racing. "I hate this house," Michael whimpered. "I hate him." Sarah stood up, her clothes ruined, her hands shaking. She looked at Michael, then at the knife on the floor. She needed to know the truth. She walked over to Michael's guitar case, which he had dropped in the hallway. She began to tear at the velvet lining, searching for anything, a stash, a note, a weapon. Her fingers hit something hard. She ripped the fabric away. It wasn't drugs. It was a small, high-tech recording device and a stack of notebooks filled with Michael's frantic, looping handwriting. "You weren't in California last month," Sarah said, her voice a cold, dead scale. She looked at the dates in the notebook. Michael had been living in the estate's basement for 3 weeks before Arthur died. He had been recording their father's final days. "You were here," Sarah whispered. "You watched him die." "I didn't kill him," Michael shouted from the kitchen. "I was waiting. I wanted to hear him say it. I wanted to hear him say he was sorry." "Did he?" Sarah asked. Michael didn't answer. He only began to hum a low, mournful melody, the sound echoing through the empty, high-ceilinged rooms of their father's tomb. The silence that followed was broken by the shrill, persistent ring of the kitchen landline. Sarah stared at the old-fashioned rotary phone on the wall, another of Arthur's classic touches. She picked it up. "Hello?" "Sarah Johnson," a woman's voice asked. It was sharp, professional, and entirely devoid of empathy. "This is Jennifer Adams from the district attorney's office. I'm calling to inform you that we have received an anonymous data dump containing Apex Industrial's authorization forms." Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. "We're in the middle of a family crisis, Ms. Adams." "You're in the middle of a homicide investigation," Adams corrected. "A search warrant has been signed. My team will be at the estate in exactly 28 hours. That's when your father's little clock hits 0, isn't it? I suggest you have your legal counsel present. And Sarah, don't bother leaving. The local PD has the perimeter blocked." The line went dead. Sarah leaned against the wall, her eyes fixed on the green numbers of the clock. 27:54:12. She had one day to find a miracle. She marched into Arthur's study, a room she had avoided since his death. It smelled of cigar smoke and expensive leather. She began to tear the room apart. Ripping books from shelves and tossing drawers onto the floor, she reached the massive oak desk. She remembered Arthur's obsession with the steps to success, the 14 stairs he made them count. She began to count the drawers. 1, 2, 3. On the 14th drawer, she felt a hidden catch. She pressed it. A small compartment popped open in the base of the desk. Inside sat a small blue glass vial and a leather-bound ledger. Sarah's heart soared. "Michael, I found it." She pulled the vial out. It was labeled VX7. This was it. The murder weapon. And the ledger. It wasn't a business book. It was a handwritten log of dates and times. "I have him," Sarah whispered, her eyes shining with a frantic, desperate hope. "If I plant this in Michael's room, or if I show the police it was hidden here, in his desk. I can prove he was the one obsessed with the compound. Subverted beat 3.2. Sarah clutched the vial to her chest. This was the logical, smart move. She was a consultant. She knew how to shift blame, how to reframe a narrative. By finding the physical toxin in a hidden compartment she discovered for the police, she could position herself as the whistleblower. She would look like the grieving daughter who uncovered her brother's treachery. It was the perfect, clean exit. She felt a surge of relief. The weight on her chest lifted. She could see the path forward, the press conferences, the acquittal, the eventual liquidation of the estate. She was winning. She was finally smarter than the room. She heard the clack, clack, clack of heavy heels in the hallway. "Sarah?" Michael called out. "What did you find?" Sarah quickly shoved the ledger into her waistband and hid the vial in her pocket. She turned to the door, a confident smile forming on her lips. "Nothing, Michael. Just some old tax papers." The door swung open, but it wasn't Michael. It was Robert Henderson. He was flanked by Thomas Wilson, who had a large purple bruise on the back of his head and a scowl that promised violence. Thomas was holding a black tactical shotgun. "Robert?" Sarah asked, her voice faltering. "What are you doing here?" Robert didn't answer. His eyes moved to the open compartment in the desk. He sighed, a long, weary sound, and straightened his tie. 1, 2, 3. "You found it," Robert said. "I was hoping you wouldn't. It would have been so much cleaner if the police found it during the search." I was going to call you." Sarah lied, her hands shaking. "No, you weren't," Robert said. He stepped into the room, his gray eyes cold. "You were going to use it to save yourself. But Sarah, look at your hands." Sarah looked down. Her fingertips were stained with a bright, fluorescent yellow dye from the hidden catch on the compartment. "That's a security marker," Robert whispered. "It only reacts to human skin. And that vial you're holding? It has a GPS tracker in the cap. The moment you pulled it out of that desk, a signal was sent to the DA's office. They now have a time-stamped record of you, and only you, handling the murder weapon." The truth hit Sarah like a physical blow. The victory of finding the evidence had been the final trap. She hadn't found the smoking gun. She had just put her fingerprints on it. "You're not a whistleblower, Sarah," Robert said, nodding to Thomas. "You're a caught red-handed killer. And Thomas, he's very upset about his head." Thomas stepped forward, the shotgun leveled at Sarah's chest. "Give me the vial, lady. Slowly." "Wait," Sarah screamed, backing away. A loud, concussive boom echoed through the house. Not a gunshot, but the sound of the front door being kicked in. "Police! Search warrant!" The DA hadn't waited for the clock. "Go!" Robert hissed to Thomas. "Secure the cellar. I'll handle the front door." In the chaos, Sarah dived behind the desk as Thomas fired a warning shot into the ceiling. Plaster rained down like snow. She scrambled out of the study and into the hallway, her heart screaming in her ears. She saw Michael huddled by the stairs. "The cellar!" she yelled, grabbing his arm. "Move!" They sprinted toward the back of the house, the clack, clack, clack of Thomas's boots right behind them. They dived into the wine cellar, Sarah slamming the heavy steel door and sliding the bolt just as a heavy weight thudded against the other side. The cellar was dark, smelling of damp earth and old corks. Sarah slumped against a rack of dusty bottles, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "We're dead," Michael whispered, sliding down the wall. "We're dead, Sarah." Sarah didn't answer. She pulled the ledger from her waistband. Her hands were still stained yellow, the dye glowing faintly in the dim light. She opened the book, It wasn't a log of toxins. June 12th. The children think I am fading. They look at me with such hunger. Sarah audits my breath. Michael hums my requiem. July 4th. I have begun the treatments. The sugar water tastes like victory. Martha is so kind, so easily fooled. She thinks she's helping me. She doesn't know she's building their gallows. Sarah froze. She flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the frantic, hateful script of her father. August 20th. I am faking the tremors today. It is remarkably easy to play a dying man when you have spent 70 years living as a ghost. There is no poison. There is only the perception of poison. The apex logs are a masterpiece of fiction. I will die of a simple bored heart, and they will spend their lives trying to prove they didn't stop it. Asterisk. He faked it, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Michael, there is no toxin. He died of natural causes. He set the stage. She pulled the blue vial from her pocket. Her hands shook as she opened the chemical testing kit she always carried in her briefcase. She dropped a small amount of the liquid into the tester. The liquid turned a bright, harmless pink. Sugar water, Sarah said, a hysterical laugh bubbling in her throat. It's just sugar water. She looked at the door. Thomas was still pounding on it, the steel groaning under the assault. Outside, she could hear the muffled shouts of the police, the sirens wailing like banshees. It doesn't matter, Michael said, his voice hollow. The signature is real. The dye on your hands is real. The vial is in your pocket. Who's going to believe a diary from a dead man who hated us? Sarah looked at the rows of wine, the thousands of dollars of legacy surrounding them. She looked at Michael, his fingers bleeding, his spirit broken. We can't win by being innocent, Sarah said, her voice turning into that cold, surgical scale one last time. The data is rigged. We have to change the variables. How? Michael asked. Martha? Sarah whispered. She remembered the nurse's constant apologies, her habit of saying sorry to the furniture, her lavender scent. Martha has the keys to the medical cabinet, Sarah said. She was the only one with him at the end. If we plant the vial in her locker, if we tell the police we found her trying to dispose of it. She's innocent, Sarah, Michael said, his eyes wide. So are we, Sarah snapped. But only one of us can afford the lawyers to make the truth irrelevant. She stood up, smoothing her ruined blouse. She looked at the master keycard. Robert is in the server room, Sarah said. He's trying to finalize the charity transfer. If I can get to the terminal, I can lock him in. I can turn his own security trap against him. She looked at Michael. Are you with me? Or are you going to spend the rest of your life coiling that wire in a cell? Michael looked at his bleeding fingers. He looked at the door. He slowly stood up. What do I need to do? The escape was a blur of shadows and calculated risks. They used the servant's passage, the one Michael had used to hide from Arthur for weeks, to bypass Thomas. Sarah reached the server room just as Robert was typing the final decryption code. Robert, she said, stepping into the glow of the humming machines. The lawyer spun around, his hand going to his tie. 1, 2. Sarah, how did you... I have the offshore keys, Robert, she lied, holding up a flash drive she'd pulled from her bag. But the system is asking for a secondary physical authorization. You have to step into the secure booth. Greed is a simple variable. Robert stepped into the glass-walled enclosure, his eyes fixed on the drive. Sarah didn't hesitate. She swiped the master key card. The glass doors slid shut with a heavy, pressurized hiss. "Sarah!" Robert shouted, his voice muffled by the sound-dampening glass. "The net gain of your career is over, Robert," Sarah said. She turned to the terminal and began to type. She didn't wipe the data this time. She redirected it. She uploaded the Apex logs to Martha Miller's private cloud account. She triggered a remote unlock on Martha's locker in the staff wing. And then she hit the final key. The countdown clock hit 0. The estate lights flashed a brilliant, blinding white. The sirens outside reached a crescendo. 3 months later, the air in the Manhattan bar was thick with the scent of expensive bourbon and cigarette smoke. Sarah sat at a corner table, her charcoal suit pristine, her eyes fixed on the news playing on the television above the bar. Martha Miller, the former hospice nurse for the Johnson estate, was sentenced today to life without parole. The discovery of the VX7 vial and her personal effects, combined with the digital footprints found on her devices, proved insurmountable for the defense. Michael sat across from her. He was clean-shaven now, his hair cut short. He didn't have his guitar wire. Instead, he sat with his hands flat on the table, his fingers perfectly still. "We won," Michael said. His voice was flat, devoid of the jagged energy it once held. "We survived," Sarah corrected. She checked her phone. 3 p.m. The liquidation of the estate is complete. Your share was wired this morning. I bought a house in Montana," Michael said, "far away from anyone named Johnson." "Good," Sarah said. She looked at him, waiting for something. An apology? A thank you? A sign of the brother she used to know? Michael didn't look at her. He looked at the television, where a photo of Martha Miller was being shown. She looked small, confused, and utterly broken. "Do you ever think about her?" Michael asked. "I don't allocate time for variables I can't change," Sarah said. She stood up, picking up her leather briefcase. She paused for a moment, her hand hovering over the table. "I logged your silence, Michael," she said, her voice a cold, descending scale. "Sincerity score, 0.0. She walked out of the bar and into the crowded Manhattan street. The skyscrapers loomed over her like glass giants, their windows reflecting 1,000 versions of her own face. She felt the weight of the billions in her account, a heavy, cold anchor. She was free. She was the smartest person in the room. And as she disappeared into the sea of gray suits, Sarah Johnson realized she had finally become exactly what her father always wanted. She was a Johnson, and the ledger was finally balanced. The end.